This is fun. Hey, everyone. I'm Andrew. It's my first time joining this call, but heard a lot of great things. I've been in the B2B SaaS space for probably about the last 15 years or so now. The first half, I started at a big ad agency way back when paid ads were sort of in their heyday back in 2008. I was part of the early stage team at Hubspot. And really the last couple stops have been working in PLG. Like before I knew what PLG was and before it was really a thing, I worked at a big self-service business called Wistia that didn't have a sales team, but had tens of thousands of customers and really no one who was thinking about commercialization. And so I joined really as a marketer coming from the background that I had, slowly started getting into conversion rate optimization, slowly started getting into new user onboarding from that, pricing, experimentation, and optimization, upgrading the free users from free to paid, and all this stuff that I didn't know how to explain to my friends and family. I used to try to tell them that I worked in like e-commerce for SaaS, and somewhere along the line it has a name, which is product-led growth, which makes it a lot easier. And that's really what I've spent the second half of my career on, is helping SaaS companies scale and balance these product-led motions, and really balancing the one-to-one motion with the one-to-many self-service motion. I was the head of growth at Wistia for 4.5 years. Most recently, I was the head of growth at Postscript, which is an SMS software for e-commerce brands on Shopify. And a year ago, I left my full-time gig to be a full-time coach and advisor. So now I run my own business as a solopreneur called Delivering Value, where I do one-to-one coaching for people that are heads of growth, and I do advising for product-led SaaS businesses. And that's primarily how I spend my time, is just thinking entrenched in this PLG growth space, and it's dope. I love it. So I'm happy to geek out with y'all. And I guess I'm just going to share, I'm just going a little bit of a rant here. And if anyone wants to interrupt and ask questions, my understanding is that's the point of these calls, and I would love it to be interactive. And I'll just share a few of the things that I'm seeing and what's got me excited. So I feel like what I'm seeing right now is PLG used to just be one thing. Like everybody that I would see in SaaS would be optimizing their website for one CTA. It used to be like get a demo or talk to sales. And all of a sudden when PLG started becoming popular, everybody was optimizing for just sign up and try it. Whether it was a free plan or a free trial, it was like all the marketers out there were like removing the additional CTAs and everybody was getting pushed into product. And we thought that that was the answer. And really what the biggest, most successful PLG companies have been doing really since day one, but the rest of us are catching up on, is this choose your own adventure thing, where there's now multiple ways that you can engage. And so some folks might want to sign up for the product and never be touched. Other folks might want a guided demo from your team. They might want an interactive demo that they can, self-guide and sort of explore on their own. Some people are down to like just play with it on the website. They don't even want to sign up for the product. They kind of just want to see what it does. And other folks might want to sign up for your product and have something preloaded so that they don't have to enter in all of their info. And this is what's got me really excited. I'm sort of thinking about this as like the choose your own adventure era of PLG and of SaaS. And one of my specialties is on the user onboarding side. And so I see this manifested in a couple of ways I just think are really cool. One is, in the past, I used to see a lot of SaaS companies optimize one onboarding experience. It was like everybody that came in saw the onboarding experience, and the people who were responsible for creating that experience were mostly just focused on removing friction and making it simple and helping people activate and starting to track time to activation and all this stuff. But somewhere along the line, they realized that, the benefit of a one-to-one sales conversation is that a good sales rep listens to what the user needs and then customizes their demo or presentation to help the user achieve their goals on their terms. And now what I'm seeing is, in this choose your own adventure era of user onboarding, there's a lot more identifying what the user goals are at the moment of signing up. So like when you sign up for a really popular tool like a Canva, like a Miro, like an Airtable, the first thing they do now is they ask you, hey, what brought you here? What's your main goal? And then they start customizing the entire product onboarding experience to help you achieve that goal as quickly as possible and in different ways. And so that's got me really, really excited. I'm also seeing one of the main challenges in PLG that I witnessed firsthand is that a ton of people will sign up for your product, poke around for like 3 minutes, then they'll do nothing, and then they'll leave and they'll never come back, and no amount of nurturing or remarketing is going to bring them back once they disengage. And they're really hard to survey, but if you can wrangle these folks, basically what you learn is that they just wanted to see your product. Like they didn't have a thing to upload. Like when I worked at Wistia, we had folks that would sign up. They didn't have a video ready. And they might be exploring video as a new channel for next quarter, or maybe they have an agency that's working on a video, but they don't have anything yet. And so it makes it super hard to show them any value if they don't have a thing that they can upload. And so we explored this at Wistia, and I'm seeing a lot more companies explore this now, which is how do you create an experience where someone can borrow stuff from you, experience the value, and then upload their stuff when they're ready. And so I'm seeing a lot more SaaS companies, again, during the onboarding experience, ask, hey, you told us what your goal is. Now, how do you want to get started? Do you want to start with an empty account and you can upload your stuff? Or do you want to select one of these pre-made things from us, and then you can just customize it based on what you need? And things like that started engaging a much larger population of these new users that historically would just leave and never come back. So that's really cool. And then I guess the third part of that that's got me really excited is for those pokers, the people that just kind of want to check out your product. The challenge is that even in PLG, the acquisition rates are relatively low. Like for the average PLG business, if you're lucky, you might acquire or you might convert something like 3 to 5% of your website traffic into new signups. And OpenView's got all this data on this. There's all kinds of different benchmarks here, but typically that's what I see across the board, which means like the vast majority of the people that are on your site get zero value, that don't get what your product is, that don't get to experience the aha, and that probably will not be a user or an advocate down the road. So what I'm also starting to see is companies take lightweight versions of their product, embed it on their website, ungated, encourage users to play with it, experience the value, and then after some amount of meaningful interaction, give them an option to continue their progress inside of their account or reach out to get in touch with your team if they have questions. So I think about this all as like this choose your own adventure era. It's not about just creating one pathway and optimizing that pathway to be as frictionless as possible. But what I'm actually seeing is an injection of friction to allow people to choose their own adventure and then optimizing all of those pathways to be as impactful as possible when it comes to conversion. So that's what's got me excited. That's sort of how I think about like this next era of SaaS. And yeah, I would love to get into it if anyone has any questions or wants to go a little deeper.
Looks like we have one hand raised from Ophir.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. You make some excellent points, and you're actually jumping into a door which we've actually opened in terms of that kind of, I want to say, either a lightweight version of the product and or maybe the pre-built journey. And one of the challenges I'm coming into is that simply from a tool set, I mean, we could either try to build this on our own, which, to be honest, the dev team is like, sorry, like and so I've been looking into, and there's literally like a zillion different tools out there for either in-app tours, which has its own problematics, or the non-gated tours, which are also that. And I just was wondering if you specifically have any recommendations on at least maybe a short list. I know you don't want to maybe choose favorites, but what are some tools you're familiar with? Simply because when I have tried them out, a lot of them, like something like choose your own adventure, that was already became very complex opposed to more of a linear. So would love to hear your thoughts on at least 3 or 4 things we should be checking out.
For sure. And this space is getting super popular, which means there's all kinds of tools that are popping up. And there's probably some I don't even know about, but the tools that come to mind are Reprise, Novatic, Walnut.io. I forget, there's probably like 5 or 6 others. There's a whole bunch of these that are popping up. Storylane's another one. I personally, if folks ask me for a recommendation, I usually recommend Novatic. I think it's a solid tool. It's a no-code option. They help people to go 0 to 1. Full disclosure, I think if you validate this, I would eventually build it in-house because it's never as good as if you build it in-house. But I get it. I went through that myself as a head of growth. It's like, especially if you haven't validated it and you're not positive that it's going to work, it takes a lot of dev effort to get this thing live. So I would use one of those tools. Again, my personal recommendation would be Novatic, but any one of those will get you there, help you to validate if this is worth building in-house, and then eventually you can make that decision when the time is right.
Thanks.
For anyone who's not as familiar with that space, Andrew, too, will you just elaborate on kind of what those tools enable?
Yeah, for sure. Those are all different no-code options to allow you to create some kind of interactive demo experience. It's not quite going to be the lightweight version of your product. It won't ever be that interactive. because it can't be. But essentially what they do is they allow you to create different snapshots of your product, make those snapshots interactive or as interactive as they possibly can be. And then you can use that to basically like start the onboarding process before they're even inside of the product. And then obviously encourage them to continue their progress as they go. So they're just a bunch of different no-code tool options. There's all different pros and cons and slight nuances between the ones that I mentioned, but those are the kind of major players in the space. I saw in the comments, somebody mentioned Pendo. I think Pendo is really good once they're in the app. I haven't seen that done ungated, like before they're in the product. Ironically, Pendo is a good example of a company that does this really well. Like Pendo, if you go to their website, they have different interactive demos for like the different areas of their product. They've got it for the data studio. They've got it for the different pop-up and engagement tools. And so that's kind of a cool one if you're looking for examples. There's a whole bunch of others, but I haven't seen their actual product applied in that way.
Nice. All right, let's dive in a little bit into some of the things that you're looking at with other companies on that user onboarding process, because I know that's you recently threw out some content on user onboarding and did a bunch of work there. So let's dive into that a little bit. What are some of the places that you see folks most commonly getting stuck, or in your past roles, what were some of those kind of hurdles that you ran into and how'd you overcome those?
Yeah, for sure. Man, I could talk about this for like an hour, but the main thing that I see is oftentimes there's not consensus on what is good onboarding. And I don't mean like what is a good user experience. I think that there's a lot of good opinions out there and best practices for that, but more so, how do you know if it's successful? And so it's crazy to me how many successful SaaS companies can't tell you what is an activated account. Like, what is it? How do we define it? How long does it take people to get there? But that's always what I start with. It's sort of like the fundamental elements that everything else compounds on top of. So I think about it as value first. My onboarding system that I follow is called the value first system. It's a framework that I've created just based on trial and error after doing this for a couple of years. But so I always start with identifying what is the thing that new users say is the moment when they receive value from the product. And the goal of onboarding is to get everybody to that point. And that's not to say that there's not different pathways to get there, but it's a binary thing that you can track. Either they've received value and we know it because we're able to track it in some way, or they haven't. And we're going to continue to try to nudge them until they get there. So I like to start with identifying like, what is that moment for your business? And then starting to track it so you can figure out, what the funnel looks like. And then there's all kinds of different tactics to get more folks there quickly, right? You can reduce time to value, which if you're an early stage company without tons and tons of volume, that's a really good place to start, which is typically just like by removing a lot of friction and simplifying the experience, working on empty states and micro copy and counting all the different steps that someone has to take from going from empty account to fully activated user and seeing if you can reduce those steps by about half. There are all kinds of different tools and things that you can do to kind of improve that. And then I think about guiding users with effective prompts. There's all kinds of different ways that you can do onboarding, right? Somebody mentioned Pendo. There's all these different pop-ups and tour tools. There's other companies that just build onboarding into the product and they just make the UX part of the onboarding experience. There's like, the getting started pages. There's all this different stuff that you could do. And for me, what I have found throughout the years is that there's typically two different types of people that sign up for products. There's, forget the exact terminology here, but I think about them as there's like people that sign up and will follow every single step that you tell them to do. And if you watch them use your product, you can almost see them hover the cursor over like every single step and the words that are written there. And then there are the people that do the opposite of that, which is that they sign up for products. They ignore everything that they possibly could read or pop up or distract them. They get lost. If you watch them use the tool, they explore like every dropdown and every nook and cranny of the tool, and then they get lost and then they're not sure what to do. And so the challenge is with all these different delivery mechanisms is you end up leaving one of those groups underserved. So for the people that like to read every step, the challenge with a pop-up tool or a tour tool is that they typically can't complete the step as they go. They typically have to read each step one by one and then try to remember what the first thing was that you wanted them to do so that they can go back. And then they end up getting frustrated and stuck and lost. And then on the flip side, the people that just want to poke around and get lost on their own and explore, they don't have, because those pop-up and tour tools typically only show one time, they're not sure what to do after they've been done, after they're done getting lost. And so what I've seen work really, really well is having some place inside of the product that people can come back to when they're ready, on their terms, when they're ready to choose their own adventure, not to be cheesy, but something inside of the product that they can come back to when they're ready, so they can go at whatever pace fits their needs. So I like things like onboarding checklists. I like things like getting started pages that live inside of the navigation. Yeah, definitely a good knowledge base is a huge part of that, and maybe an academy as well. But in terms of like in-app delivery mechanisms, I like things that people can navigate back to. And obviously, like, there's no better way than actually making your product just more discoverable and user-friendly. So I think anytime that you can just really build the product with discovery and first user experience in mind, like, that's the ticket. So think about that when it comes to onboarding. And then really, like, the advanced stuff is the personalization segmentation. So, in the same way that marketers have learned over the years that additional segmentation is a really powerful conversion tool, we've learned the same thing on the user onboarding side and on the sales side, right? Like, that's why you have specialists in different vertical ownership areas and things like that. The same thing applies in onboarding. And I've tested all these different ways to segment, from persona to vertical to industry to company size. And I haven't found any more effective way to onboard and activate more new users than jobs to be done. So that's the one that I advocate for. If you're building this experience, if you're not sure what they are, run an open-ended survey for a couple weeks. Ask everybody that signs up for your product some flavor of, hey, thanks for stopping by. Would you mind sharing what your main goal is for creating a free account today, or signing up for a trial today, whatever it is that you offer, and then seeing what they say. It's typically better to do it open-ended so you can kind of use their words. But essentially what you want to do is do that for some period of time. Find the 4 to 5 most common answers, turn that into a checklist or some kind of an interstitial page, and have that be the first step of the onboarding process. Hey, you just filled out a really simple form, or maybe you did the Google integration so you didn't have to actually fill in your email and a password. Why don't you tell us what you're looking to do? And then follow up from that is that you customize the onboarding experience to help them based on their goal selection. In the companies that I mentioned earlier, like the Miros, the Airtables, the Canvas, even smaller companies like Wistia and Help Scout, like, they all ask flavors of this. It's really, really impactful. Something that I work on almost with every advising client when they get to a certain scale. And what's really cool is when you create this system, you'll naturally start to get more data on which one of these goals converts highest into paying customers and has the highest LTV or annual lifetime value or whatever. And then you can give that feedback loop back to marketing so that they can go back and find more of the best types of users as you learn what they are. You can even ask when somebody purchases, like, hey, what's the reason why you pulled out your credit card and purchased today? And based on the answers to that, typically people will say some list of features, and you can use those features as part of the onboarding for that recipe. So I love all that kind of stuff. And then we talked already a little bit about thinking about some of the ready-made playbooks and templates, so that when people sign up, if they don't have stuff to enter right now and then, that they can borrow something from you and still experience the value really quickly. And then I like to accelerate that whole motion with some ungated thing on the website. So essentially you can start the onboarding process before they ever fill out the form and get into the product. So those are the kind of steps that I think about when it comes to onboarding. Starts with defining value, reduce time to value, figure out the right delivery mechanism so that you can guide users in the products, personalize the experience with these custom recipes, engage them faster with these ready-made playbooks, and then see if you can build momentum before they ever sign up. Like, that's the value first framework that I follow with almost every advising client that I work on onboarding with.
Aditya, did you have a question?
So I do one question that, you talked about the onboarding experience for a product company. Ideally, who should probably own up the onboarding experience, right? Whether it should be a customer success manager or a key account manager. And the follow-up question would be on that how would you differentiate between a customer success manager and a key account manager at an organization?
What was the second question? A customer success manager versus a what?
Key account manager.
Cool. I'm going to answer the first one, and then I'm happy to maybe give a quick overview on my take on the second one. But being that I'm a kind of a marketer turned growth product manager, I'm going to leave that to someone with probably more experience there. But my take on onboarding is that it needs to be owned by some product manager. And that's not to say that it has to be someone from the core product team, but it needs to have someone who is accountable for activation rate and balancing the funnels, either the one-to-one or the one-to-many funnels. And so when I think about that, it's typically a growth team, but it's sometimes a product team that has maybe a slightly different approach and operating system from your typical product team. It's typically more experimental, trying things, moving fast, running experiments, validating things before investing deeply, less like long tail discovery at the front end of things and more willingness to try stuff and let the data guide them. So I think about that's who owns onboarding. It's somebody who's responsible and accountable for driving new user activation, whether it's in a one-to-one or one-to-many motion. It's someone who's responsible and accountable for balancing that whole thing. And then I guess thinking about like the customer success managers and like kind of how all that stuff fits in general, there's a few points where the one-to-one motion and the one-to-many motion intersect. And the two things that I see that are most common is one is at the moment that a new account signs up. So when somebody new signs up, there's some enriching typically that happens on the back end. And usually like the top 15% that look like the biggest, baddest, most enterprise-esque companies usually get routed into a one-to-one assisted experience. It's not to say that they can't continue inside of the tool and poke around and get a ton of value. And if they don't want to engage with sales, they can just keep going and pull out their credit card and buy if they want to. But typically those are folks that need and have like custom procurement needs. They'll probably have questions about integrating with other areas of their tech stack, all kinds of stuff that y'all probably encounter. So the moment of sign up is one. Then the other time where I see an intersection between the one-to-one and one-to-many is later on during the usage, if there's any PQL type moments. So if somebody raises their hand and says like, hey, I've got a question, I'm like lost, I'd like to talk to someone about, from the sales team. If they've done anything, so like if their behavior, maybe they've explored an area of the tool that's only an area of the tool you would explore if you're an enterprise type lead. Like let's say you've got an integration that you would only be exploring this integration if you're a very, very large customer, or it's a very, very expensive company that is the integration partner. And if somebody's exploring that and poking around and maybe engaging with that tool, that probably they're an enterprise type lead as well. So maybe you've got some behavioral based indicators. And then the third is usage based. So like based on their volume and their patterns inside of the product, are they using a lot of stuff in a way that indicates like, hey, this person might be eligible either for our next plan or maybe for a high volume discount, something like that. So those are kind of the nuances there. I won't get into like the difference in like the day-to-day for the customer success manager versus the AE because I haven't been either of those. So I'll leave that to somebody else.
Cool. All right.
I actually had another question. I know my hand is still up.
Sure.
But just real quick. So Andrew, back to the whole onboarding thing, because we've been playing around with it. What we found is that we can identify the areas where people get stuck from like certain analytic tools and then use session or screen capture tools to actually see what's happening. But I always feel like there must be like, I'm always scratching my head, what else can we do to understand the why, not the what? Because the what, I feel like we've kind of figured that out, but the why, that's where I always feel like, short of just seeing what they did or asking them, we're kind of scratching our heads. Do you have any suggestions there?
Yeah, and the why is like what their motivation is, or can you explain a little bit more?
No, I mean, like we might see a funnel where we have, if you have to do 5 steps to do something, and we see from step 5 to 6, there's a huge drop. And then we might look at the session recordings and say, well, what's happening between 5 and 6? And sometimes we get insight, but sometimes we don't. So it's like, what I'd like to do is at that point, stop and ask the person, wait a second, like, what are you thinking?
Yeah, it's hard. It's super hard to ask people when they get stuck, like, hey, why are you stuck? It's like, because they're stuck, they're less likely to engage is what I found. I've tried to survey those folks and you don't get much helpful intel. What I do in those kinds of instances is I zoom in and I get a mix of the qualitative and quantitative stuff. So on the quantitative side, you can look and see if you can drill down into any specific segments. Again, based on the user goals, is there certain types of people that seem to be getting stuck, or is everybody getting stuck across the board? If it's one segment getting stuck, then you can drill in there and see if it's copy, if it's examples, if they need a different type of delivery medium or something else that might be more intuitive. So I would look there and drill in that way, especially if it's a milestone or a step along the way. So you've already kind of zoomed in a little bit. I would go one layer deeper, see if there's a segment that's really interesting. And then what I would do is I would collect a bunch of qualitative as well. So I'm a big fan of full story. I talked a lot about like full story Fridays, which is something that my team used to do. I'd gather the whole team in a room, and when we'd identify a problem like this, we would just watch 20 people in like a half an hour go through that step. And we'd see a mix of people that were successful and people that got stuck. And typically what happens is you see stuff that you would have missed in the quantitative. Like, so you'll see some random browser come in that gets like a weird bug that you hadn't realized, or someone comes in and they translate your app into another language and like all of a sudden everything breaks, or you see someone who's like on a tablet with outdated OS. You'll see it is typically what I've learned. Or if it's just a user experience issue, you'll probably see that as well, because you'll see somebody like rage clicking the wrong thing, or highlighting or highlighting some text that doesn't make sense, or trying to play a video that is erroring or something. So those are the two tools that I use. It's hard, but that's as close as you can get to it in my experience.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the questions. Slightly quieter than our usual chats. So in 2 weeks, I'm expecting everyone to perk up just a little bit more once I know the heat wave just came through for many of you though, so I don't blame you on the slight exhaustion coming into this chat. But anyways, thanks for joining, Andrew. Appreciate you answering everybody's questions. If anyone would like to join that Slack Connect channel that we have, just shoot me a quick email. One of these days I'll have an easier link for you to just join it that way. But in the meantime, just shoot me a message. And otherwise, I'll see you all in 2 weeks.